The night feels heavier than usual, as if even the air is waiting for something to begin. You can feel it, that quiet pull beneath your thoughts, like the tide beneath still water. Somewhere beyond the noise of the day, there is an ocean that remembers you. Jung once called it the night sea, the place the soul drifts to when it can no longer pretend to be strong. Down there, light does not vanish. It breathes differently, slower, deeper. This is where the journey begins, not with effort, but with surrender. Let the surface fade. Let the silence rise. Your soul is learning to breathe again. He sits before the dim mirror, the room wrapped in a hush too soft to name. The light is gentle, but it reveals what has long been hidden. A face that learned to smile on cue. Around the shoulders lies an invisible skin, stitched together by fear and the hunger to be accepted. It once fit perfectly, but now it rubs against the quiet parts of the soul, leaving marks only felt, never seen. Every day, that skin speaks before the heart does. It lowers its tone when a truth wants to rise. It stands tall when all it wants is to rest. It performs a silent ritual of survival, opening the door when the world knocks, closing it when exhaustion visits. And after so many years, the ritual has become the person. In the office, the cheerful employee greets the morning, holding a cup of coffee steady while their eyes search for a reason to stay awake. At the dinner table, the father nods quietly, strong enough to hold the world for everyone but himself. On the phone screen, the friend who is always fine sends a smiling emoji, then places the device face down, letting the silence breathe for them. The persona is not just a mask. It is a psychological skin. It was sewn from praise and rejection, from the first night we learned to be good, and the last morning we learned to be strong. It has carried us through childhood, through the noise of ambition, through every room where being liked was safer than being real. It has done its job. It has kept us safe. But one night, the world grows still. The stage lights fade, the applause never comes, and the actor realizes the play ended long ago. The makeup on the face turns to dust, and the practiced smile begins to tremble under its own weight. There is no collapse, no drama, just the slow understanding that what once protected has now become the distance between who we are and who we pretend to be. It happens quietly, in the way we answer a simple question with a rehearsed tone, in the way the smile arrives half a second before the feeling, in the way our body tenses when someone says, "Be honest." Small threads begin to loosen, and the skin that once kept us together starts to breathe. So tonight, try a gentle experiment. Take a blank page, write one sentence you have never dared to say aloud, one truth that has waited for silence. Read it slowly, without judgment, then fold the paper and leave it somewhere unseen. Let it rest, like a letter addressed to the self that still hides behind performance. Curiosity here is quiet. There's no need to rush to remove the mask. When the armor softens, it is not weakness. It is the soul expanding to fit its true shape again. When the smile comes a moment later than usual, it means the feeling has finally caught up. And when the pretending stops, there is no emptiness waiting, only air, the kind you can finally breathe. The mirror does not lie. It only waits. What once shielded you from the wind also kept you from your own reflection. Now, the wind has calmed. The mirror is ready to show what has always been there. a face, unpainted, still alive beneath the act. The persona once protected you. Now, it is time to meet the world without it. There is a certain silence that follows the moment you realize how much of your life has been lived inside someone else's reflection. It begins softly, almost kindly. A thought that says, I wonder who I'd be if no one was watching. Nietzsche once said, the strongest are those who can stand alone. Yet most souls spend a lifetime adjusting their posture to fit into mirrors held by others. Somewhere between wanting to be seen and needing to belong, the truth of who we are starts to bend. We are taught early to read faces the way sailors read the sky, to predict storms, to avoid disappointment. A child learns quickly that love often follows performance. A smile earns praise. Obedience earns warmth. And so, without noticing, we start to polish a reflection that is not our own. We carry it into adulthood. This habit of adjusting light and tone, of reflecting what pleases, never what's real. But the cost of constant reflection is distortion. The mirror we polish becomes warped by expectation. And soon, we can no longer tell if the image staring back is us or just what we've learned to project. When you live to be seen, you stop seeing yourself. The mirror begins to hum quietly with 1,000 silent rules. Be agreeable, be impressive, be kind, even when you're empty. You laugh at jokes that wound you, nod at ideas that don't feel true, and call it maturity. You become fluent in the language of approval, and somewhere inside, your voice starts to fade. The tragedy is not that others fail to notice you, but that in your reflection, you no longer notice yourself. Nietzsche believed that real strength lies in divergence, the courage to be misunderstood, to stand apart even when the crowd moves the other way. But the world rewards resemblance, not difference. It praises reflection more than originality. And so we learn to echo what earns applause, mistaking it for belonging. Yet belonging built on imitation is fragile. It cracks under the weight of silence. What's left is a hollow sound, the echo of a voice that once tried to be everything but itself. Imagine for a moment that the mirror could speak. It would not scold you for seeking acceptance. It would whisper, "You've done enough pretending." It would tell you that reflection is not the enemy, only the beginning. To look truly is not to adjust, but to witness, to see the uneven edges, the small tired truths, the beauty of imperfection without needing to polish it away. The mirror only distorts when you use it to please others. When you look to understand, its surface stands clear again. So tomorrow, live one day without trying to be liked. Notice the moment your lips part to agree out of habit, and let the silence take their place. Do not rush to fill it. The world will not collapse if you stop performing. In that pause, you might hear the faintest sound, the return of your own voice. It won't be loud, it won't demand attention, but it will feel real, like a breath you didn't know you'd been holding. Strength, perhaps, is not the roar of defiance, but the quiet act of no longer bending. You do not have to break the mirror. You only need to stop mistaking its reflection for truth. What is real does not shimmer. It simply stands, waiting for you to look back without fear. There comes a moment when the mask, so carefully kept in place, begins to loosen, not with noise, but with the quiet grace of something inevitable. It doesn't shatter or fall dramatically. It simply softens at the edges. The eyes behind it blink differently, as if remembering an old rhythm. Jung believed that this moment is not collapse, but birth. The moment when consciousness finally meets what it has been running from. Authenticity does not arrive with applause. It enters like dawn, unnoticed, patient, touching everything in silence. For years, we learn to live inside characters we've built. We speak lines rehearsed by generations before us. We wear expressions that fit the room. We apologize for the weight of our truth, as though it were too much to carry in public. But one day, the illusion begins to flicker. A small tear appears, barely visible, and through it, something softer begins to breathe. It is not rebellion that pulls you out of the role. It is tenderness, the natural fatigue of pretending. The tear on the mask is not failure. It is a window. Light finds its way through even the smallest fracture. At first, it feels strange. You see yourself without the filters of expectation, without the shield of control. It feels almost exposed, like walking barefoot after years in armor. Yet beneath the discomfort, there's an odd relief, a quiet exhale that whispers, "I am still here." For the first time in a long while, the reflection in the mirror doesn't perform. It simply exists. Authenticity doesn't require you to discard everything. It asks for presence, the courage to stay when the mask begins to peel. It's the moment you stop editing your emotions to sound acceptable, when laughter returns without permission, when silence no longer feels awkward but whole. The world won't notice the shift. It happens in the invisible corners of being, in the way you breathe, in the way you no longer rush to fill space, in how your shoulders finally lower a little. There is beauty in imperfection, but more than that, there is truth in incompletion. You were never meant to be polished. You were meant to be real. Jung once wrote that the act of becoming yourself is not a climb toward perfection, but a slow reunion with what was always there. Authenticity is not found at the end of effort. It is remembered in the pauses between striving. You don't need to try to be real. You only need to stop pretending that you're not. So tomorrow morning, stand before the mirror for 30 seconds. Don't adjust your hair. Don't smile to soften the gaze. Just look, as if meeting yourself for the first time after a long absence. Notice the eyes, not their color, but their weight. Notice the faint tiredness around them and how that weariness is also proof of living. In that reflection, there is no ideal, no mask, no persona left to defend. There is only what remains when everything else falls quiet. The first glimpse of authenticity is fragile, a flicker in the chest, a pause between breaths. But it is enough to begin again. What once hid behind performance now stands in the open, gentle and unguarded. And perhaps that is the only kind of truth worth keeping, the one that doesn't need to shine to be real. There is a room beneath every house of the mind, a quiet, forgotten basement that holds what the heart could not carry upstairs. Jung called this place the shadow, but he never meant it as darkness to be feared. He saw it as a chamber of the soul that has gone unfed, a space filled with old emotions still waiting to be seen. We spend most of our lives decorating the upper floors, arranging the lights so carefully that we forget what still breathes below. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the collection of all we denied ourselves to feel, the anger we disguised as composure, the sadness we called weakness, the envy we hid behind politeness. Every time we swallowed our truth to remain lovable, a small piece of us descended into that room. And over the years, it became crowded with all the parts of the self that were told to stay quiet. If the soul is a house, then the shadow is its memory, not haunting, just patient. Sometimes, in the still hours of night, we hear the creak of its floorboards, a sudden irritation at something trivial, a wave of sadness for no reason, a jealousy that catches us off guard. These are not intrusions, they are visitors from below. The shadow knocks, not to frighten, but to remind. It asks to be acknowledged, not erased. And when we listen, when we dare to open that old door, we find that what seemed monstrous is merely misunderstood. There is light even in that basement, though it does not come from above. It glows from the recognition that what was once exiled still belongs. The moment you look at the thing you've avoided, really look, it loses its power to terrify. Fear thrives on avoidance, compassion dissolves it. The shadow feeds not on evil, but on neglect. And when attention touches it, like sunlight through a crack in the floor, it softens into wisdom. No healing happens by pretending the darkness isn't there. You cannot rise without roots, and the shadow is where the roots of the soul intertwine. The peace we chase above ground begins with acceptance below. Every emotion denied becomes a seed waiting for permission to grow. Jung understood this paradox, that only by descending into ourselves can we truly ascend. To meet the shadow is not to confront a monster, but to embrace an orphan part of your own spirit. Tonight, take a quiet moment and write down 3 emotions you often hide. Do not explain them. Do not judge them. Just name them. That small act of recognition is a light switch. It tells the forgotten rooms within you, I know you're there. The walls will not crumble, the air will not darken, but something inside will shift. A soft hum of understanding, a door unlocking from the inside. Because what you hide doesn't disappear, it waits. It waits for gentleness, for honesty, for the gaze that doesn't flinch. And once you finally look, you'll see it clearly. The shadow was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to return you to wholeness. Every encounter with another person is a kind of mirror, polished not with glass, but with emotion. What irritates, offends, or unsettles us often reveals more about the reflection than the source. Jung suggested that what we most resist in others is what we have not yet understood in ourselves. The world becomes a field of signals, and each reaction, no matter how uncomfortable, is a message written in the language of the shadow, a language that speaks through tension rather than words. Imagine each emotional reaction as a letter, sealed and sent from a part of you that still waits to be heard. A sharp tone from a colleague, a dismissive glance from a friend, a stranger's criticism. These are envelopes that arrive at the door of consciousness. Yet instead of opening them, we often tear them up in anger, convinced they belong to someone else. But if we look closer, the handwriting is our own. The emotions we feel are not invasions from the outside. They are echoes from within, stirred by recognition. The mind reacts quickly, like a flame meeting oxygen. It wants to defend, to explain, to return fire. But the soul asks for stillness, a pause between the spark and the blaze. In that 10-second silence lies a doorway. You can choose to ask not, why did they say that? But rather, what part of me is being called awake? That question transforms conflict into invitation. The trigger is not the wound, it is the knock on the door of the room you've avoided. We are trained to see triggers as the enemies, signs of weakness, immaturity, or lack of control. But triggers are teachers disguised as discomfort. They reveal the places where your history still lingers, where an old story continues to write itself without your permission. The friend who ignores your message might stir a childhood memory of being unseen. The colleague who challenges you might awaken an unhealed fear of not being enough. These moments are not punishments. They are gentle alarms reminding you that the past is still alive in the nervous system, waiting for compassion rather than control. To understand the language of triggers is to practice fluency in self-awareness. It means noticing before reacting, breathing before replying. When you resist the urge to respond instantly, you give space for translation. The raw emotion becomes a sentence, then a message, then a meaning. In time, you begin to read your anger as sadness in disguise, your jealousy as longing, your defensiveness as an old prayer for safety. Slowly, the letters make sense. So the next time irritation rises, take 10 seconds. Feel it, but do not feed it. Ask softly, which part of me is speaking through this? Perhaps it's the part that once wasn't heard. Perhaps it's the part that still believes love must be earned. Sit with that voice as you would with a child, not to silence it, but to listen. The energy of reaction, when met with curiosity, becomes the light of understanding. In the end, every trigger is an invitation home. Every discomfort is a messenger asking for attention, not judgment. And when you begin to read these signals as letters rather than attacks, the world softens. You realize that the people who irritate you are not obstacles on your path. They are mirrors showing you where you still have room to grow. There comes a quiet turning point on the inner path. The moment when you stop trying to escape the shadow and instead invite it to sit beside you. Jung called this the work of integration, bringing what was unconscious into awareness, not to purify it, but to understand it. In that simple shift, darkness begins to soften. What once felt like an enemy becomes a teacher. What once frightened you begins to guide you. It is not about conquering what's hidden, but about learning to move with it. Like a dancer who finally trusts the rhythm she used to resist. The shadow is not destroyed through denial or discipline. It loses its power when met with light, and that light is awareness. Imagine a candle in a dark room. The candle doesn't fear the darkness. It creates the very contrast that gives its flame meaning. The light does not shout to overcome the dark. It simply shines, and in that shining, both can coexist. So it is with the psyche. Consciousness does not erase the shadow. It illuminates it. Each recognition, each moment of truth becomes a flicker that reveals what was always there, waiting to be seen. Integration is not a dramatic event. It's subtle. A long exhale after years of holding your breath. You begin to remember past mistakes without wincing. You see the pain you caused and the pain you received, not as evidence of failure, but as evidence of growth. The moments that once haunted you become part of your story's texture. You no longer divide yourself into good and bad, light and dark, worthy and unworthy. Instead, you begin to sense that wholeness was never about perfection. It was about inclusion. There is peace in saying, "That was me too." The anger, the envy, the fear, All of them were expressions of a self still learning how to see. You cannot become whole by cutting yourself into acceptable pieces. Healing happens when you hold the parts that once fought each other and realize they were never separate. The shadow's greatest gift is perspective. It shows you that compassion is born not from innocence, but from understanding. Before you sleep tonight, close your eyes and let your mind wander back to an old mistake. One that still whispers sometimes. Don't argue with it. Don't justify it. Just breathe and look. See it not as a wound, but as a lesson. Ask yourself, what did this moment teach me about who I am? If you can answer that question without shame, you have already begun the integration. The act of remembering without judgment is the soul's quiet redemption. Wholeness is not a destination. It's the steady rhythm of light and dark learning to exist in harmony. The shadow doesn't vanish when you awaken. It learns to move differently. It follows, but no longer leads. It softens into intuition, into humility, into wisdom that knows both joy and sorrow as teachers. The candle still burns. The room still holds its darkness. But now you understand. They were never at war. They were always parts of the same dance. There is a strange kind of silence that modern life no longer knows. It's the silence that used to exist between thoughts, between footsteps, between breaths. Somewhere along the way, humanity grew restless with that quiet. We began to fill it with music, with chatter, with screens glowing long after midnight. Jung once suggested that what we fear most is not the darkness outside, but the voice that speaks when everything else stops. So we build walls of noise to keep it out, forgetting that what we're avoiding is the sound of our own soul calling us home. Noise becomes a comfort because silence tells the truth. It does not flatter. It does not distract. It simply reveals. Beneath the hum of notifications and conversations, there's a pulse that waits, soft but steady, asking questions we no longer have time to answer. The noise, like a fog, covers that deeper rhythm. It keeps us busy with surface echoes. Yet in every quiet space we flee from, there is something sacred still listening. The absence of sound is not emptiness. It's an unspoken presence waiting to be heard. Imagine a room filled with old bells. Each one rings with the residue of moments past, unfinished conversations, unresolved fears, unexpressed feelings. They keep ringing because no one dares to still them. The mind works the same way. We keep replaying the noise of memory, fearing what would emerge if it ever stopped. But the truth is simpler. Silence is not the enemy of life. It is the breath beneath it. When the bells quiet, you begin to hear the faint melody of your own heartbeat, steady and ancient, like the earth remembering itself. We have mistaken stimulation for aliveness. We scroll, we talk, we consume, always seeking something to fill the space where meaning should be. Yet real aliveness often hides in stillness. It's in the way air feels before dawn, in the rhythm of your chest rising and falling when you finally stop trying to impress the world. The more we drown in external noise, the further we drift from that inner pulse, the one that tells us who we are when no one is watching. Every addiction to sound, to motion, to busyness is a quiet avoidance of intimacy with ourselves. It's easier to hear music than to hear our doubts, easier to chase stimulation than to face stillness. But silence has never been void. It's full of answers we've forgotten how to ask. It speaks through calm, through patience, through the small tremor of being alive without needing to perform. to listen to it is to remember. Tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone, give yourself 5 minutes. No music, no screen, no words. Just sit and breathe. At first, your mind will resist. It will reach for a thought, a sound, a distraction. Let it. Then let it fade. Somewhere after the 3rd minute, you'll notice something. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of peace. What remains when everything else falls away is not emptiness. It's you. Silence is not a void. It's the space where truth waits, patient and kind, for your return. There's a rare kind of power that doesn't move, doesn't speak, and yet changes everything it touches. Jung once said that the soul can only reflect itself when the waters of the mind are still. In stillness, truth appears without effort, not forced, not sought, but revealed like a lake that mirrors the moon only when the wind rests. The inner world reflects its light only when thought stops reaching. The modern mind, trained to chase, to fix, to produce, has forgotten the simple art of being. Yet the universe, in all its vastness, unfolds quietly. Perhaps that is its lesson to us, that creation itself begins in silence. Stillness is not idleness. It is the highest form of participation. To be still is to become available to reality, to intuition, to grace. When the body stops moving, something deeper begins to stir. You start to hear what was once drowned out by motion, the whisper of your own awareness. The heart slows, not out of fatigue, but out of remembrance. For a brief moment, life stops being a race and becomes a presence. And in that presence, you discover that the world never needed your control, only your attention. Think of a lake on a windless night. Its surface is so calm that it reflects every star, every cloud, every quiet ripple of light from the moon. This is what happens within you when you stop stirring the waters of thought. The mind, left undisturbed, becomes a mirror, one that doesn't invent reality but simply shows it. Stillness is not about stopping the world, it's about seeing it clearly. Every wave of anxiety, every thought of fear, every restless need for meaning is just movement. Beneath it all, the water remains pure. In stillness, time begins to soften. Moments no longer rush into one another. The air seems thicker, fuller, like it's listening with you. Even ordinary acts, washing your hands, waiting for an elevator, pausing between words, become doorways into awareness. You realize that existence was never hidden. It was simply overshadowed by motion. The world outside hasn't changed, but your perception has. Stillness sharpens the senses. It brings life closer, detail by detail, breath by breath. This is not the stillness of withdrawal. It's the stillness of awakening. The kind that doesn't close its eyes but opens them wider. Not to the noise, but to what breathes beneath it. In that space, peace is not a goal, it is a consequence. The more deeply you listen, the more you realize that stillness was never an absence. It was the essence of everything that makes life possible. It's the pause between two heartbeats, the quiet between two thoughts, the silence that allows all music to exist. So, once a day, find a small moment to be still. It doesn't have to be perfect or profound. It can be the few seconds before the elevator opens or while water runs over your hands. Let those moments remind you that being present is not about doing more. It's about doing less, until only awareness remains. Stillness does not pause life. It lets life reveal itself. Pain has a voice, but it speaks in frequencies quieter than thought. Most people never hear it because they never stop running from it. They drown it in noise, in work, in conversation, in the endless movement of survival. But the moment you stop, the moment silence becomes bearable, pain begins to speak, not to wound, but to reveal. Jung once suggested that neurosis is the soul's way of asking for attention. The ache is not your enemy. It's the body's whisper that something inside has been left unheard. Pain is like a child knocking at the door, not to destroy the house, but to be let in. Ignore it, and the knocking grows louder, more desperate. Listen, and it softens into story. It tells you where you've been holding too tightly, where you've abandoned your own needs, where love was replaced by endurance. It doesn't want pity or analysis. It wants witness, the quiet kind of presence that doesn't fix or judge. Most suffering persists not because it's unsolvable, but because it's unseen. The soul, like a child, calms the moment it feels held. When silence returns to your life, the first thing you often notice is discomfort. The mind resists. It demands reasons, explanations, distractions. It fears the rawness of feeling without filter. But silence is not a void. It's an amplifier. It magnifies what's been buried. Beneath the restlessness, you'll find the tender hum of unprocessed emotion. Grief that never spoke, fear that never cried, love that never said goodbye. And in listening, you begin to heal, not by changing the past, but by finally allowing it to be heard. Most of us have been taught to dissect pain, to treat it as a puzzle to solve rather than a presence to meet. But pain is not asking why. It's asking, how long will you ignore me? When you feel hurt, instead of interrogating the reason, try asking softly, what do you need? That single question changes everything. It shifts the energy from resistance to relationship. Pain stops being a storm to endure and becomes a guest to understand. What it usually asks for is simple: rest, honesty, gentleness, space. Listening to what hurts requires courage, but not the kind that fights. It's the courage to stay, to remain seated with discomfort long enough to see what lies beneath it. You will find that the pain you feared most was never there to punish you. It was training you in strength that does not harden, the kind of strength that breathes, that bends, that forgives. When you stop fearing silence, pain becomes your teacher, not your jailer. It points to the places in you that still want to live. So the next time pain arrives, emotional, physical, invisible, don't close the door. Let it knock. Sit down beside it. Listen without interruption. Ask what it needs, not what it means. In that moment, you will realize that silence has always been a gym for the soul. The space where resistance turns into resilience and hurt becomes understanding. Every person carries a story, a private mythology stitched together from memory, meaning, and survival. At first, it protects us. It gives chaos a shape, gives pain a reason, and gives the heart a place to rest. We cling to that story because for a time, it feels like safety. But the soul has its seasons, and there comes a quiet moment when the story no longer fits. It becomes too small for who we've become. The words that once gave comfort now feel heavy, rehearsed, and distant, like reading an old diary in a language we no longer speak. Jung wrote that we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That includes recognizing when our story has turned into a cage. Every narrative we tell about ourselves, the wounded child, the savior, the strong one, the one who always holds it together, was once a truth. But truths evolve. What once saved you can begin to suffocate you if you keep trying to live inside it. The self does not die when the old story ends. It is reborn. The moment you realize you no longer need to keep proving the same pain, something inside exhales. Think of an old journal tucked in a drawer. Its pages are filled with heartbreak, with victories, with versions of you who are learning how to survive. You wouldn't throw it away. It holds your history. But you also wouldn't keep rewriting on those same pages forever. The past doesn't vanish when you stop rereading it. It settles into memory, quiet and complete. Healing in this way is not forgetting. It is remembering without reliving. The stories we outgrow have a certain tenderness. They remind us of the time when we didn't yet know how strong we were. The roles we played, the protector, the pleaser, the dreamer, were necessary. They built the bridge that brought us here. But at some point, that bridge no longer leads forward. Continuing to walk it only circles you back to the same view. Growth begins when you allow the pen to move again, to write beyond the familiar lines. When we stop identifying with the old story, the silence that follows can feel strange, almost empty. We wonder who we are without the struggle, without the narrative that once defined us. But this emptiness is not loss, it's space. It's the page turning. The blankness that follows an ending is where truth starts to breathe again. You can honor what came before without living there. Gratitude does not require residence. Tonight, take a piece of paper and write 5 lines about your old story, the one that shaped you. Write them honestly, without trying to fix or justify them. Then add one final line. And I have changed. That single sentence transforms memory into meaning. It acknowledges both your survival and your evolution. It tells the universe and yourself that you no longer need to prove who you were. You're already becoming who you are. In time, you'll learn to visit your old story with the same softness you would a childhood home. To look around, smile, and leave the lights off on your way out. There are moments in life when everything familiar begins to fade. The titles, the roles, even the small rituals that once defined who we were. It feels like loss, but it's not destruction. It's shedding. Nietzsche once said, "The snake that cannot shed its skin must perish." The same is true of the self. We are not meant to carry every version of who we've been. Growth demands release, and release always feels like dying. But beneath that quiet death lies something essential, the raw soil of becoming. Identity is a beautiful illusion, a mask made not of lies but of necessity. It helps us navigate the world, to be known, to belong. Yet, over time, what was once armor becomes confinement. We spend years polishing the surface, the name, the image, the personality, until we mistake the reflection for the reality. Then one day, something happens. The reflection no longer answers back. The person you thought you were begins to feel distant, hollow, like a song played too many times. You don't recognize the melody, but you sense the silence that follows it is honest. The death of identity rarely arrives with drama. It comes quietly, like rain washing away the dust from an old path. The ground beneath was always there. You simply couldn't see it. What dissolves in these moments isn't your essence. It's the accumulation of expectations, fears, and borrowed truths. The rain doesn't erase the road, it reveals it. So when you find yourself feeling lost, consider this. Perhaps you are not losing yourself at all. Perhaps you are finally being found beneath all the layers that never belonged to you. There is tenderness in this unmaking. The ego resists, whispering that you're disappearing. It calls the process failure because it cannot comprehend stillness. But the soul knows better. To outgrow an identity is not to vanish. It is to evolve beyond the costume. The self that dissolves is the one built for survival. The one that emerges is built for truth. This transformation doesn't happen in light. It happens in the in-between, where one version of you exhales and another quietly begins to breathe. When that in-between arrives, don't rush to fill it. The impulse to define yourself again, to grasp for a new role, a new story, a new certainty, is strong. Resist it. Let the rain fall. Let the silence settle. Ask gently, am I losing myself, or am I leaving behind what I no longer am? That question alone can soften the fear. You begin to see that identity is not a fixed shape, but a series of dissolvings and reformations. Each ending is only the skin that makes room for a larger life. So, when the ground shifts, let it. When the old self falls away, do not mourn too loudly. You are not disappearing. You are becoming translucent enough for light to pass through. The true self does not arrive with thunder. It arrives with calm, in the way rain nourishes without asking for recognition. To be reborn, something must quietly die. Freedom does not begin when you run from your past. It begins when you stop carrying it as proof of who you are. Jung once wrote that until we make peace with our history, it quietly directs our lives. Most people believe remembering is the key to understanding, but sometimes true wisdom lies in forgetting, not in erasing memory, but in loosening its grip. The past is not your prison, it is your teacher. And when its lessons are complete, you are allowed to walk away. We live surrounded by ghosts of our own making. Moments replayed, conversations reimagined, mistakes rehearsed until they become identity. The mind clings to them because pain wants meaning and guilt wants structure. We confuse memory with responsibility, believing that letting go would dishonor what we've been through. But the truth is quieter. You do not owe your suffering eternal attention. You honor the past, not by reliving it, but by allowing it to rest. Healing, at its core, is an act of mercy, especially toward yourself. Think of a traveler walking through a long journey. In the beginning, every item feels necessary. Each bag a memory, each object a fragment of safety. But as the path grows longer, the weight becomes unbearable. The traveler realizes that not everything can come along. To continue, something must be released. This is what it means to forget, not to deny what was, but to decide that carrying it forever is no longer an act of love. The journey does not dishonor the baggage, it transcends it. Forgiveness is the first step in that lightening. It doesn't always arrive as a revelation. Sometimes it comes as a sigh, the simple decision to stop punishing yourself for being human. The person you were back then did what they could with what they knew. Holding on to their mistakes is like dragging old luggage through every new doorway. The soul, weary from the weight, longs to move freely again. If you can, take a quiet evening to sit with a memory that still feels heavy. Write a letter to yourself from that moment, not to correct, but to understand. Let your present self speak to the one who didn't yet know better. Write with compassion, with softness, with the patience of someone who has seen the long road since then. When the letter feels complete, tear it gently, not in anger, but as a gesture of release. The paper will fall, but the weight will lift with it. The art of forgetting is not neglect. It's wisdom that recognizes when remembering has done its work. The past will always exist, but it no longer has to define the present. You are not the echoes of your mistakes. You are the silence that follows them. You are not what happened. You are what you choose now. The more lightly you walk, the more you realize that freedom isn't found in holding on. It's in the grace of finally letting go. Every relationship we enter is a mirror, not polished silver, but living glass. It reflects not only the beauty we show, but the truths we hide. Jung once said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Love, in this way, is not merely affection. It is revelation. The people we are drawn to often illuminate the parts of our soul still waiting to be understood. What we call chemistry is sometimes recognition. The soul saying, "Here is a lesson you have been avoiding." Two candles light a single room, yet each burns from its own wick. One flame doesn't complete the other, it complements it. But when one candle dims, the room still glows. This is the quiet secret of connection. Love was never about merging into one light, but about learning to shine without casting the other into shadow. When we confuse love with possession or reflection with dependency, the mirror fogs. We begin to chase in others what we have abandoned in ourselves. The people we love most often awaken both our light and our shadow. Their warmth reminds us of what we deserve. Their distance exposes what we still fear. A partner's silence may echo the childhood ache of not being heard. Their admiration might stir guilt for never feeling good enough. These are not flaws in love. They are invitations. Relationships do not break us. They reveal where we are still breakable. When we see this clearly, we stop blaming the mirror for what appears within it. To love another is to face yourself through them. It requires honesty, not about who they are, but about who you become in their presence. Do you shrink to be accepted? Do you perform to be adored? Do you cling to avoid being alone? These questions are not accusations. They are lanterns guiding you back to authenticity. True intimacy begins when both souls dare to look into the same mirror without flinching. When love becomes less about comfort and more about awareness. Ask yourself gently, do I love this person, or do I love how I feel when they love me? The answer will not come immediately, but it will come honestly. Love born from need fades when the need is met. Love born from presence deepens with time. The goal is not to find someone who completes you, but someone who stands beside you as you complete yourself. Two whole souls create a light that does not consume but expands. When you meet someone who stirs something deep within, pause. Look beyond the emotion. Ask what part of you they are reflecting. The unhealed, the hidden, or the awakened. Every connection, no matter how brief, holds a mirror. And when you are brave enough to look, you find that love's true purpose is not to fill your emptiness, but to reveal that you were never empty at all. Love without boundaries becomes exhaustion disguised as devotion. Jung believed that wholeness in relationships requires both connection and differentiation. the ability to meet another soul without dissolving your own. Boundaries are often mistaken for barriers, but they are not walls built from fear. They are the invisible circles drawn from self-respect. They are not declarations of distance, but quiet affirmations of balance. When set with love, boundaries do not push people away. They keep love clean, gentle, and breathable. Imagine a candle surrounded by a ring of salt. The circle is not there to confine the flame, but to protect it from being extinguished. It preserves the purity of the light, allowing it to burn steady and calm. Boundaries serve the same purpose. They protect the integrity of your energy, ensuring that what you give remains luminous instead of depleted. Without them, love turns into performance and generosity becomes sacrifice. What begins as empathy slowly transforms into exhaustion. True compassion cannot exist where there is no space to breathe. For many, saying no feels like betrayal, a rejection of affection or duty. But in truth, saying no with kindness is one of the purest forms of love. It means you value the relationship enough to keep it honest. It means you understand that connection thrives not on constant giving, but on reciprocity. To give endlessly without rest is not love. It's avoidance. It's the fear that if you stop giving, you'll stop being loved. But love that requires your depletion is not love. It's dependency in disguise. Setting a boundary does not require anger. It can sound like a whisper, like a breath before the word no. It can come without explanation, without guilt. You are not obligated to justify the preservation of your peace. Boundaries are not punishments. They are agreements between your soul and your sanity. Each one says softly, I can love you and still choose myself. That sentence, once learned, becomes a compass, guiding every act of care away from codependency and back toward clarity. Practice it gently. The next time you feel the urge to overextend, to agree when you mean no, to comfort when you are empty, pause. Feel the weight of that impulse. Then, instead of explaining, simply decline with softness. Let silence hold the rest. The world will not fall apart. The people meant for your life will understand. And those who don't were only ever drawn to your boundaries' absence, not your essence. In time, you'll realize that boundaries do not limit your love. They refine it. They turn affection into something sustainable, kindness into something wise. The candle continues to burn, the salt remains undisturbed, and love, once chaotic, becomes clear again, a light that warms without burning. Nietzsche once said that love is not salvation. It is two souls standing side by side, gazing toward the same horizon. True love does not rescue, it reveals. It does not erase individuality, but deepens it. When two whole beings meet, they do not dissolve into each other. They expand together. This is the quiet paradox of love. It feels like merging, yet what actually happens is awakening. Two centers of gravity orbiting in harmony, each made stronger by the other's presence. Think of two rivers meeting on their way to the sea. For a brief distance, their waters intertwine, their colors touch, but neither loses its essence. They travel together, not to become one, but to reach something vast that neither could touch alone. That is what a conscious relationship feels like. It's not ownership, not fusion, but companionship. The joining of two journeys that still honor their separate origins. Love, when mature, becomes less about possession and more about witness. It is saying, I see you as you are, and I will walk beside you while you become more of it. The illusion of romantic completion, the idea that someone else will fill our emptiness, is one of the most beautiful lies we tell ourselves. It turns love into a transaction. I give you what you lack. You give me what I've lost. But what happens when the other falters? When they cannot carry what was never theirs to hold? The relationship collapses under the weight of expectation. Real love begins when we stop asking to be completed and start choosing to be mirrored, not by someone who fixes us, but by someone who reflects our growth. To love deeply without losing yourself is a discipline of presence. It means holding your ground even when the other moves. It means keeping a small inner space untouched, a quiet room within the heart where you can return to listen to your own voice. Without that return, love becomes noise. With it, love becomes music. Each moment of solitude you preserve within a relationship keeps it alive. It reminds both souls that union was never meant to be a disappearance, but a dance. Every day, give yourself a moment of return. Step away, not in rejection, but in reverence. A few minutes to breathe, to reflect, to remember the center from which you love. Because when you forget that center, love turns from expansion into dependency. Two rivers cannot meet freely if one has already dried up. In truth, the greatest gift you can bring to another soul is your own wholeness. The quiet assurance that you do not need them to be complete, only to be seen. When two complete selves meet, love becomes something larger than either of them. A third space, invisible yet undeniable, where both can rest without fear of losing themselves. That is the kind of love that doesn't fade when the world shifts. It flows onward, wide and clear, toward the sea of becoming. There is a quiet tension that lives in every human life. The pull between reason and emotion, between the map and the compass. Logic is the mind's attempt to make sense of the unknown, to draw lines across uncertainty so we might feel safe walking it. Emotion, however, is the tide. It moves through us, wordless, instinctive, reminding us that we are not machines built to calculate, but beings built to feel. Jung believed that real wisdom comes not from choosing one over the other, but from learning how to let them speak to each other. The mind, left alone, can become a brilliant navigator, staring only at the stars. It plots coordinates, measures distance, and trusts only what can be named. But a sailor who looks only upward forgets to listen to the sea. The waves, though unpredictable, hold their own intelligence. They shift, whisper, and respond to storms long before the sky shows a sign. In the same way, emotions sense truth before logic can define it. The sailor who ignores the current may still know the constellations, and yet he will drift off course. Logic without heart becomes sterile. It leads to a life of precision without peace. But feeling without reason becomes chaos. It burns bright and then consumes itself. The harmony of the two is what gives direction meaning. The mind shows the path. The heart tells you when to walk. Some decisions will never make perfect sense on paper. Leaving a job, ending a relationship, choosing stillness over progress. Yet, deep within, there's a subtle vibration of rightness, a calm that hums beneath fear. That is the compass speaking, the quiet wisdom of the soul, reminding you that peace is a more trustworthy sign than applause. The modern world praises intellect and logic as measures of maturity. But logic, no matter how sharp, cannot calculate belonging. It cannot quantify love, intuition, or grace. It can only describe the map, not the terrain. To live wisely is to let reason draw the route while emotion guides the pace. You don't need to silence one to hear the other. You only need to learn their language. To notice when your chest tightens even as your mind agrees, or when clarity arrives not as an argument, but as a sigh. The next time you stand before a decision, pause before you analyze. Ask yourself softly, does this make me feel peaceful? Not happy, not excited, peaceful. The body knows long before the intellect admits it. Truth often hums rather than shouts. If the answer feels still, even in uncertainty, that's the heart aligning with reason. But if the thought feels right and the body feels heavy, the map may be correct. But the compass says, wait, you were never meant to choose between thinking and feeling. You were meant to let them dance, one holding the light, the other listening for rhythm. Together, they keep you from both drifting and freezing, allowing you to move not just intelligently, but wisely. Control is a quiet addiction, one that wears the mask of strength, but often hides the pulse of fear. Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot command himself will be commanded." Yet in our attempt to master life, we often mistake control for power. We tighten our grip on people, outcomes, even time itself, believing that precision will keep chaos away. But control, taken too far, becomes its own prison. A heavy armor that keeps out not only uncertainty, but also wonder. True mastery is not domination. It is the ability to release. The need to control begins with love, the love of safety, of order, of knowing what comes next. But life, by its nature, resists being tamed. Like wind against a sail, it moves in rhythms we cannot predict. The sail's strength lies not in its stiffness, but in its surrender. It catches the wind not by resisting it, but by opening to it. In the same way, your will becomes powerful not when you force the world to obey, but when you learn to move with what is already unfolding. Control is the mind's way of saying, I don't trust life to hold me. It is the attempt to rewrite the script before the story is told. We plan, anticipate, and perfect, as if certainty could protect us from loss. But the truth is simpler and softer. Every moment you control too tightly, you suffocate its potential. The very act of gripping hardens what could have grown. When you try to command the wind, the sail tears. When you trust the breeze, the journey begins. There is a quiet exhaustion that follows chronic control. The fatigue of playing both director and actor in every scene. We call it responsibility, ambition, leadership, but underneath lies tension. The shoulders stay high, the breath short, the mind restless. You can manage your schedule, but you cannot choreograph your destiny. Some of life's most beautiful turns happen when the script falls apart. Control protects you from chaos, but trust introduces you to grace. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means giving space. It means loosening your hold on how things should go so they can show you how they could. Control seeks guarantees. Trust seeks alignment. The first exhausts, the second creates flow. The paradox is that once you stop forcing outcomes, the outcomes begin to arrive naturally. Not because you have abandoned effort, but because your effort is now aligned with rhythm instead of resistance. Tonight, think of one thing you've been trying too hard to manage. A person, a project, a timing that refuses to bend. Instead of tightening your grip, take one step back. Let the wind move through it. See what unfolds when you stop pushing. Life is not something to subdue. It's something to navigate. And navigation, like sailing, is less about force than about listening. When you finally learn to trust the wind, you realize that the ocean was never against you. It was waiting for your surrender to carry you farther than control ever could. Long before we learn to think, we learn to feel. Jung once said that emotion is the most ancient language of the soul, a vocabulary older than words, older even than thought itself. Every pulse, every tear, every tightening in the chest carries information that reason alone cannot translate. The mind speaks in logic, but the heart speaks in tone, and in the quiet intervals between them lies wisdom. Not of analysis, but of awareness. Emotion is not a flaw in the human design. It is a guidance system, a compass that points toward truth when the map of reason fails. Yet we've been taught to distrust it, to categorize feelings into neat boxes of good or bad, strong or weak. In doing so, we silence the oldest part of our intelligence. When anger rises, it is not an enemy. It is a signal that a boundary has been crossed. When sadness appears, it is not failure. It is the body's way of mourning what was loved. When fear whispers, it is not cowardice. It is the soul's reminder to move with awareness. Each emotion is a messenger carrying truth from the depths to the surface. The trouble is that most of us learn to translate emotion into narrative too quickly. The mind rushes in to explain, to justify, to fix. But emotion doesn't need explanation. It needs presence. The next time you feel something stir within you, grief, longing, irritation, even joy, pause before you label it. Write down one word that names it and nothing more. Then leave it. That single word becomes a mirror, a still image of the moment before the story began. You don't need to interpret it. Just seeing it is enough. The soul understands recognition as a form of healing. Imagine the rhythm of your heartbeat, steady, tireless, constant. It has been with you since before language, before memory, before even thought. It is the first sound your body ever made and the one that will remain until your final breath. The heart does not argue or calculate. It communicates. Every beat is a translation of what the mind cannot yet grasp. To reconnect with emotion is to return to that primal rhythm, the pulse that reminds you of your aliveness. Emotional intelligence is not about mastering feeling, but about listening to it without distortion. It's the art of letting your emotions inform you without letting them control you. To feel deeply and remain centered is not a contradiction. It is evolution. You can allow sadness without drowning, anger without harm, joy without attachment. In that balance, emotion becomes insight, raw energy turned into understanding. So when emotion rises, do not rush to quiet it or to dissect it. Sit with it, as you would with an old friend who has traveled far to speak with you. Ask nothing of it. Simply let it speak in its own language. The tremor, the tear, the warmth in your chest. Then listen. The body will tell you what the mind has forgotten. That emotion was never your weakness. It was your oldest form of knowing. After every unraveling, there comes a silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but of renewal. Jung believed that the psyche, like nature, moves in cycles of destruction and creation. What feels like breaking down is often only the preparation for a quieter kind of birth. when the old masks fall, when control fades, when emotion has said all it needed to say, what remains is stillness, fragile at first, but unmistakably alive. It is the soft hum beneath chaos, the heartbeat you can only hear when everything else stops. Rebirth is rarely dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or revelation. It arrives gently, like dawn after rain. The light doesn't argue with the darkness. It simply appears, and in its presence, the shadows begin to soften. There's something sacred about this kind of awakening, not the kind that fills you with excitement, but the one that fills you with peace. You begin to realize that all the seeking, the striving, the questioning were only ways of circling back to where you have always belonged. Here, within yourself. The process of fragmentation was never punishment. It was initiation. The moments you thought were endings were the soul's way of making space for clarity. Pain cracked the surface so light could enter. Confusion dissolved the illusion of control. Loss cleared the room for gratitude. Now, as the dust settles, what's left is not emptiness, but openness, a wider capacity to feel without fear. The silence that once frightened you now feels like home. Think of the world after rain. The air is softer, the colors truer. Even the smallest leaf glows with a quiet kind of resilience. Nothing in nature rushes its recovery, and yet everything returns. You, too, are returning. You do not need to rebuild the person you were before. You only need to allow yourself to exist without pretense, to breathe without the weight of becoming someone else. The soul does not demand perfection. It only asks for presence. Tomorrow morning, before the world wakes, open a window. Let the air touch your skin. Inhale deeply and notice the rhythm of your breath, how it enters, pauses, and leaves. You are still here. You have carried yourself through storms that once seemed endless. That simple fact is a quiet miracle. Whisper a small thank you, not to the world, but to the part of you that refused to disappear. That acknowledgement alone is enough to begin again. Rebirth is not a single moment of transformation. It's a way of seeing, of realizing that peace was never something to find, but something to remember. The world outside may continue to move fast, but inside, you are learning the slower rhythm of truth. And in that rhythm, every breath becomes a beginning. Peace is not a destination to be reached. It is the home you carry quietly within you, the one you forget only when you go searching for it elsewhere. Jung believed that the soul's deepest longing is not for perfection, but for return. A return to wholeness, to balance, to the still point at the center of all movement. The world teaches us to chase serenity like an achievement, but peace was never something to earn. It is a memory waiting to be remembered. There comes a time when the search begins to tire you, the endless striving for validation, for understanding, for belonging. It all starts to blur. You begin to notice that no matter how far you go, every road eventually curves back to yourself. What you were trying to find in others, safety, acceptance, warmth, has always lived inside you. It was only covered by noise, expectation, and fear. Coming home to yourself is not about isolation, it's about recognition. You do not need to build this home. You need only to unlock it. Imagine a small house made of breath and awareness. Its walls are not made of stone, but of gentleness. Its doors open inward, not outward. No matter how chaotic the world becomes, this house remains untouched, a place where you can rest without performing, where every thought is allowed to arrive and leave without judgment. This is the true home of the soul, not a physical space, but a state of being that says, I am safe, even here. When life feels unsteady, we instinctively reach outward for comfort, for certainty, for something to anchor us. But the deeper truth is that stability begins within. You are the ground you've been trying to stand on. Each breath is a threshold, each heartbeat a reminder. When you place your hand over your chest and feel that rhythm, you're touching the only home that never leaves you. The body becomes both temple and teacher, reminding you that peace doesn't arrive when life is fixed. It arrives when you stop running from yourself. The practice is simple but profound. Whenever you feel lost, pause, place your hand gently over your heart and whisper, I'm still here. Feel the warmth beneath your palm, not as proof of survival, but as evidence of presence. You don't have to understand everything. You don't even have to be calm. You only have to be here. That small act of acknowledgement realigns you with your center, the quiet axis around which everything else spins. The home inside you has no locks, no walls, no doors that close. It expands with every act of awareness, every breath taken without judgment, every moment you choose softness over control. In returning there, again and again, you discover that peace is not something you find after the storm. It's what has been holding you steady all along. You are not wandering anymore. You are remembering your address. Freedom is not the ability to do anything. It is the quiet courage to face yourself without fear. Nietzsche once wrote that true freedom begins when a person no longer hides from their own reflection. Most of us spend years mistaking rebellion for liberation, chasing choice as proof of power. Yet freedom has little to do with permission. It has everything to do with presence. You are not free when you can move anywhere. You are free when you no longer need to escape. The journey toward freedom begins in silence. It starts when the noise of expectations fades, when the constant hum of comparison, validation, and proving finally grows still. In that stillness, you meet a version of yourself that does not need applause. It does not need to win. It only needs to exist truthfully. At first, this honesty feels uncomfortable, even frightening. To sit in your own company without distraction is to hear the echoes of every part you've avoided. But as you listen longer, the fear softens. You begin to realize that the monster you were running from was never a threat. It was your own power, waiting to be understood. Freedom is not about control or defiance. It's about trust. A bird doesn't fly because the sky allows it. It flies because it no longer fears falling. The sky, like life, has always been wide enough. The only real cage is hesitation, the mind's belief that safety lies in staying small. The bars are invisible, built from the words should and cannot. When you stop believing in them, they dissolve. What remains is not recklessness, but grace. The steady flight of someone who knows the air will hold them. True freedom feels quieter than we expect. It doesn't shout. It doesn't seek recognition. It arrives like breath, unnoticed but essential. You begin to make decisions that align with peace instead of fear. You speak gently because you no longer need to be loud. You rest without guilt. You forgive without needing an apology. This is not submission. It is strength unburdened by ego. It is the kind of freedom that cannot be taken because it was never given, it was remembered. Tonight, take a moment to write down 3 signs that you have changed. They don't need to be dramatic. Perhaps you no longer apologize for existing. Perhaps you no longer chase what hurts. Perhaps you've learned to sit still without panic. These are not achievements to be measured. They are proof of quiet freedom, the kind that grows inside when fear stops dictating your choices. When you no longer fear your own depths, life begins to open effortlessly. You stop fighting to become and start allowing yourself to be. The world remains unpredictable, but you are no longer ruled by its storms. There's a calm that moves through you, like air beneath wings, invisible yet undeniable. That is the moment of release, the soft awakening into your true size. You are not flying because the world is easy. You are flying because you finally remembered you were born to. The morning light slips quietly through the curtains. It does not demand attention. It simply arrives. The air feels lighter now, touched by the kind of silence that follows understanding. You have come far, though the distance cannot be measured. The path was not about becoming someone new. It was about returning to the place you once left without noticing. This is what awakening feels like. Not an explosion, but a soft recognition. You see now what Jung meant when he said that enlightenment is not about imagining light, but about becoming conscious of the dark. The darkness was never the enemy. It was the soil where the light learned how to grow. Every shadow you faced, every mask you removed, every silence you allowed, all of it was preparing you for the stillness. You sit now in that stillness, no longer rushing to define yourself, no longer afraid of what remains unspoken. The peace you searched for was never hiding in the world outside. It was waiting here, in the quiet ability to stay with yourself without needing to flee. The night has done its work. The dawn only reveals what it left behind. A soul both softer and stronger than before. Breathe deeply. Feel the weight lift from your shoulders. You do not need to fix or chase or prove anything anymore. The light you sought has always been here, patient and steady, like the pulse beneath your hand. You are not broken. You are whole, finally remembering what that means. The sun rises higher. The room brightens. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels new. You can rest now. Not because the journey is over, but because you have arrived within it.